Set silence also. Natural.
Okay.
This is The Real Deal. Welcome back to The Real Deal. Our next guest is Wared Seger. He is the founder and CEO of Parrot Analytics, a New Zealand-based company that have created a unique positioning in the heart of the global entertainment industry. He counts amongst his clients, or Parrot's clients, some of the biggest streamers, filmmakers, and studios in the world. Wared, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much.
This is a conversation I've been looking forward to for a while. Why don't you start just by telling us how you got into this world? How did Parrot Analytics come about?
We started from down in New Zealand, bottom of the world. We came out of a technological point of view, not from a media entertainment point of view. We developed this technology at the time, this is rewind 2012, that allowed us to track what people were, what they're watching, what they're talking about, what they're discussing, what they're streaming, what they're pirating, what they're searching for. And very quickly we got a sense that, and this is before anyone was talking about AI, before
Right.
AI became, the new hot thing in town. But, we come at it from a more scientific and engineering point of view, that it gave us a really, really, not just important, but an unprecedented pulse check on what the world wanted. And so, what we started doing was layering on top of the foundational technology these systems that allowed us to parse all that information. We're talking about billions of people, what the world wanted. And so we developed this metric that we call demand for content. And the fast forward a couple of years, the first thing that we rolled out to the media entertainment industry is this demand measurement system of what is in demand around the world. And, one thing led to another, and here we are.
And so that's a really good point. So, I mean, obviously historically it's always been about eyeballs, and the metrics has always been viewership and so on, but you created a new currency pretty much, which is demand. And so, obviously don't want to get into the details of the sort of technicals behind it, but...
Happy to.
Well, I'm sure, I'm more than happy to hear it, but how do you measure that? I mean, how does that come about? How do you sort of measure this currency?
Yeah. So we built on this idea of the attention economy.
Right.
We didn't invent this. This came about 40 years ago or so, in the early days of the internet. And the idea of the attention economy is that what the internet was going to do was to transform our time, that's our attention, to be the most valuable currency that over time was going to be traded. And to the extent that can be quantified, it can be traded and monetized. And of course, companies that were able to, in the early days of the internet, capture attention in some way, shape, or form and monetize it, were able to build, trillion-dollar enterprises, businesses. Look at the early social media platforms and so on. It's just about monetizing attention. And so attention manifests itself in lots of different ways and forms. And so we took that thesis of the attention economy and we built on it for the media entertainment industry. We built on it in that, like every other economy, the attention economy, we figured, had to have principles of microeconomics, of supply and demand. That's why demand.
Right.
It's because, microeconomics 101 is the pricing power of a pair of sneakers is a function of its supply and demand in the marketplace. So to the extent that you can measure supply and demand for a given product, you can measure its pricing power. So we set out to measure global supply and demand for content.
Okay, content being any sort of screen content.
Being, when we first started, it was specifically TV and film content. Very quickly, we realized that actually the principles of supply and demand microeconomics apply not just to content, of course, but we knew they didn't just apply to content, but what we figured was actually we can quantify it for other entities like people, talent.
So in terms of personalities.
Right. You're able to measure supply and demand for an actor, an athlete, a brand. You can measure its pricing power. And so very quickly, we built our supply and demand measurement systems to track the broader global media and entertainment and sports and brands and everything in between. So when we talk about media and entertainment, really it is an umbrella term that encapsulates TV shows, movies, video games, IP, books, brands, talent, athletes, football clubs, and so on. And if you have access to 3 billion people's data and what they're interacting with and what's capturing their attention, and you can parse it in a way where you can distill it down to each one of those entities, then you can plot everything on a world map and understand what the relative supply and demand is for these entities around the world.
Yeah, if you have access to all of those people.
Correct.
And so, I mean, how does that work with you? Do you sort of take segments of audiences in each market and sort of extrapolate that?
No,
or?
no, we don't. We do zero extrapolation. Everything we do is empirical, which means we say, how are people spending their attention in a given country? And it turns out that actually, for 99.9% of all countries out there, people spend their attention online and in the same way.
Yep.
They search for stuff, they watch clips, they watch videos, they stream stuff, and they talk about stuff, they read about things and so on. So we started plugging into each of those different areas of demand expression. So search engines, social media platforms, global piracy traffic, streaming traffic, wiki traffic, where people were discussing and online forums and so on. So again, the first few years was really about building the foundational infrastructure that allowed us to capture the global demand. And then the latter few years of our journey since then has really been about parsing that and analyzing it and developing these systems that can take supply and demand and analyze it in a way that allows us to understand how much revenue is a TV show generating on a streaming service.
So how accurate is that?
Yeah. So,
I mean, if I was to say TV show X, would you be able to tell me the value of that specific TV show?
Exactly right. So recently in the Hollywood strikes, the WGA and SAG strikes, I think that was the first that some people in the industry really got to know the power of what it is that we do, because that popularized the fact that we can do exactly that. That I can log into a system now and type in the name of any TV show on any streaming service and figure out not just how much money it's making, but how it's generating revenue. Is it attracting subscribers? Is it retaining subscribers?
Amazing.
For those streaming services? Is it driving advertising revenue if they have an ad-supported tier?
And how accurate is that?
So from an accuracy point of view, it's remarkably accurate. And so we already knew that supply and demand drives pricing power.
Right.
And so, that has come long before us, microecon 101. But what we did is we proved it for the media entertainment industry.
And so, you had mentioned earlier about sort of AI. So what you described is kind of monitoring and being able to value content. But what about predictive technologies?
Yeah.
So how does that work?
Good question. Yeah, the first phase one of our sort of world domination plan was to report historically,
right?
Which in itself is a multi-billion-dollar problem for the media entertainment industry,
right?
Because again, I know you well know, but many producers make content and they put on a streaming service and they have no idea how it's doing. They may get told tidbits about it's doing okay and so on.
Yeah.
But to be able to actually say day by day, week by week, quarter on quarter, year by year, how any given TV show or movie is doing on a streaming service from a monetary value, an economic value, not an eyeball point of view, because that is a whole separate conversation where actually viewership no longer aligns with value from today's business models, streaming business models. So if you're able to actually correlate one-to-one with the actual reported revenues of these streaming services, and you break that down to a title by title basis, then you can figure out what the incremental marginal contribution is of every piece of content on a streaming service. And that alone, that historical reporting, was the focus of much of our early work.
Right.
Now, in the past couple of years, as I mentioned, and to your question, if you have access to the world's data and what's capturing attention, the global supply and demand for all types of media and entertainment, then surely you can apply some of the latest, machine learning techniques to forecast how something might perform ahead of time.
Okay.
Right. And so, like a really easy example, and I'll get increasingly more sophisticated with it. An easy example is to take an existing TV show and you say, well, let's look at how season 1 has done.
Yep.
And then you kind of see this and it kind of, trickles down. And then you go, I wonder how season 2 will perform. Right. That's relatively easy. That's sort of bread and butter now. You don't need sort of advanced techniques for that, because you measure things like decay of audiences, episode completion rates. We measure how people drop off episode to episode. We measure the post-last episode, what the decay of demand is, or we develop this metric called longevity, which is on a scale of ephemeral to evergreen. You know, what is the longevity power of a piece of content?
Right.
So you apply this for hundreds of thousands, millions of titles around the world on a country by country basis. Remember, the data is global, so you can zoom in into every individual country.
Oh, so you can actually zoom into individual regions, countries.
Exactly. So you can
Oh, wow.
actually, so you can spin the world and go, like, I want to zoom into this country and figure out what the audience patterns are in this country. What are people into? Both, you can do it at an aggregate population level of that country,
Yep.
or you can do it down to an individual title basis. You can figure out what musician is trending where, and so on and so forth. So again, back to your question though, the forward-looking aspect is really now where much of our work is going. So, which is, how do we take this, you know, incredible global foundation that we've developed, and how do we apply it to de-risk forward-looking investment decisions? Forward-looking investment decisions.
That's a game changer.
Yes, it is a game changer.
For producers, at least.
I think so. I'm biased, obviously, but,
Yeah.
but it is because it is not just for producers. It's a game changer for streaming services. It's a game changer for networks. It's a game changer for investors, global content investors.
But if I may, so, you know, me as a producer, if I have access to these kind of tools and I can go to a streamer and say, well, I know that the value of my show or movie or whatever is going to be X, so that gives me negotiation power with the streamer. Surely the streamers wouldn't be too happy about that.
No. And we often find ourselves in these positions where, you know, we have two clients of ours on opposite ends of the negotiation table.
Right.
And, you know, we're Switzerland or New Zealand, where we first started.
Right.
We're apolitical when it comes to that. So
And are you able to stay neutral in those situations?
we are. I mean, you know, we never lose sight of who we are and what our mission is. You know, and our mission is to unlock if we go to our headquarters in Auckland, New Zealand, you go to our building, it says unlocking the magic of content. You know, we're big believers in the power of storytelling and the impact that it has on people's lives.
Yes.
You know, storytelling is as old as human civilization.
Yes.
And you know, even before the advent of writing, we told stories to pass knowledge from one generation to the other. So our mission sort of keeps us focused on what our role is, and our role is to be the scientists of the industry, is to quantify historical impacts, quantify forward-looking potential impacts, and if so, two different people ask us the exact same question, they'll get the exact same answer.
Okay. And so I would imagine the bulk of your work has been sort of Hollywood, US, North American based. What about the Arab world? I mean, obviously, you know, we've been talking a lot, and actually I used your data to kind of quote the fact that we've had a 16x increase in demand for Arabic content in the last 4 or 5 years. How do you see this region developing? Because obviously you have oversight of what's happening in the world, and if you can zoom in, I'm really interested to know about Arabic content specifically and where that's going and what your sort of view is on that.
Global resurgence, I would call it. You know, not just within the region, but at a global level. So yes, in the early years, up until very recently, much of our work, you know, was really centered out in our biggest commercial office in Los Angeles.
Right.
Really with the Hollywood producers, creators, studios, streamers, talent agencies, entertainment lawyers, you know, all the different stakeholders that we work with, film funds, and so on. Increasingly, more recently, we started, and even before sort of the Arab world, the Middle East, which is sort of the center of your question. But if you rewind back a few years and you saw the global rise of Korean content, of Spanish content, and so on, absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And typically in those cases, what we notice is all it takes is one hit.
Right. For the floodgates to open.
For the floodgates to open.
Yeah.
So you look at Squid Game.
Yep. Squid Game moment, as you call it.
Squid Game moment, as is often referenced. Post Squid Game, as really interesting, if you go year by year, when Squid Game launched season 1, post Squid Game, if you index the travelability, which is a metric that we developed to measure how well a TV show or movie travels outside of its home market.
Right.
If you index the travelability of Korean content as an aggregate, a 70% lift.
Wow.
Year on year. And that has sustained.
Since Squid Game.
Since Squid Game. So the year after, 70% lift for Korean content. Suddenly people are like, oh, I didn't know I was into Korean content.
Right.
You know, around the world.
Right.
Around the world. So travelability is a global index, is a global measure.
Yeah.
And so, of course, you have since seen, you know, what that has done from an overarching impact on the Korean culture being exported globally.
Yep.
Spanish content, La Casa de Papel, was that moment for Spanish content. Money Heist.
Yes.
We recently published a report at the last MIPCOM actually, with ESEX, one of our clients, the Investment and Trade Commission
Right.
of the Spanish government, and we quantified that over the last 4 years, from 2020 to 2024, Spanish content has generated $5 billion of revenue on streaming services alone.
Amazing.
Of revenue on streaming services alone, right? So now come back to your question, which is specifically for the region. That is more recent.
Yeah.
That has been done more recent.
How recent would you say?
I'll tell you how recent. So let's zoom out first globally, just so sort of from our perspective, so we look at the whole world of data. So globally, the end of 2024, Q1 this year, 2025, marked a really important milestone for global storytelling. For the first time ever, more than 50%, just over 50% of global demand for content is now for non-English language content.
Well, and that's the first time that's happened.
For the first, well, at least since we started measuring over the last, 13 years or so.
Right.
That's a milestone moment.
Right.
That's a landmark moment where, for the first time ever, you have more than half of the global demand for content is for non-English language content. Now, again, we've been talking about like Korean content, Spanish content. This trend has been happening. People are familiar with Turkish content.
Sure.
Latin American telenovelas being exported and so on.
Yeah.
So at a global, from a global point of view, at a global aggregate, the fact that now just over 50% of global demand is for non-English language content tells you something.
Right.
Right? So now let's zoom in into the Middle East specifically, within the MENA region.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, just before you continue, I would imagine that the reason for that is that the streamers have really sort of broken down the language barriers, that people are happy to watch different languages, even with subtitles and so on.
Absolutely.
That would be the main driver, I would imagine.
Absolutely, that was a massive catalyst. Right. Massive catalyst.
Right.
Now, not the only catalyst, but a massive catalyst.
Sure.
Because you have movies like Parasite.
Yes.
Not just winning an Oscar, but look at at its peak, it was the #1 movie in demand globally.
Wow.
And now it has benefited from
of course,
the catalyst that you were talking about, from audiences being trained now to watch content from all languages and all cultures. But there's a bunch of things that went into it. But absolutely, that has been a massive catalyst in breaking down barriers.
Yep.
And the streaming business model is really interesting because it allows you to invest in a piece of content once and then amortize your costs, over a period of time across many territories.
Yep.
And so you get that, the ROI lift from it. So
there's hope for us in Arabic content.
Oh, more than just hope, man. It's actually really exciting. So let's zoom into the Middle East specifically. So we talked about globally, about half of the global demand is for non-English language content. Within the Middle East is actually one of the first regions. When you break it down on a region by region basis, the Middle East was one of the first regions that ticked over the 50% mark.
Okay.
Half of the demand for the non-English part in the Middle East is now for Arabic content, which again is a first. Okay. By the way, just for context, in terms of how recent, because you asked about how recent before I forget, pre-COVID, from a global point of view, just over 20% of the global demand was for non-English language content.
Wow, that's a huge jump in literally 3 or 4 years.
Pre-COVID, so yes, COVID, people home, streaming, turning on stream. Yeah, absolutely, a catalyst. People started watching all types of content from all over the world. And
right.
So from our vantage point, as we're looking at the data, you see that pre-COVID, 2019, we're looking at 21% of global demand being non-English language content. The rest is English language content.
So more than doubled.
It's more than doubled.
Yeah.
Fast forward to 2024, 2025.
Yeah.
I was zooming into Arabic content specifically.
Yeah.
Arabic content since 2020 has been doubling in demand regionally year on year.
Amazing.
So in the last 4 years, 2021, 22, 23, 24, it has grown 16x in demand in region. It's 1,600%.
Phenomenal number.
Right? Yep. That's within the region. That is the Middle East, so MENA, I would say.
Yep.
The Middle East and Northern Africa's demand for Arabic content has doubled year on year since 2020. Internationally, and this for me was the more surprising and perhaps from an opportunity point of view also more exciting.
Yep.
Internationally, outside of the MENA region, the demand for Arabic content over the same time period has grown by 13 times.
Wow. Wow. So that's outside non-Arabic speakers wanting Arabic content.
Outside of the MENA region, international demand for Arabic content has grown by 13 times over the last 4 years. So it is very exciting. It's very exciting if you're an Arabic content producer, because this is the moment.
Yeah, I mean, and we've been saying this last couple of years that, the race is on for our Squid Game moment. But we haven't managed to sort of get there
Not
yet.
yet.
Any ideas? Do you have an opinion on why we haven't managed that
It's
yet?
just, I think that the investments only started flowing in recently.
Right.
You talk about these other industries, or the Korean content, Spanish content, the ones that we mentioned, even Turkish content. That the investment has been going on for a while.
Right.
So you don't just get like an overnight, a global phenomenon, global success. That said, we gave a presentation recently, and there was a TV show called Al Rawabi School for Girls.
Right.
I think a Jordanian TV
That's right.
that generated in 2024 alone over $100 million in subscription revenue for Netflix. And
phenomenal.
It's not Squid Game yet, but my point is, you're just starting. You're just beginning.
So has that been the sort of the most successful, by your metrics, successful Arabic show?
Amongst one of, definitely amongst one of. There's been various successes here and there. There've been movies that have done really well in China, for example, which is a market that often doesn't get a lot of coverage and so on, but actually is a massive potential opportunity market for international producers, not just Arabic producers.
Yeah.
But my point is, you're starting to get that. And the more investments that go into it, and producers start to learn, creators start to learn for what works, what doesn't work, and so on. And so now, come back to your prior question about forecasting and looking at forward de-risking investments.
Yes.
One of the things that we're doing now with producers in the region, but also globally, is helping them figure out how to optimize the production to make sure that you maximize the odds of it becoming a global hit.
Okay.
Because we see what's happening around the world. We see what's trending, what's attracting subscribers, what's retaining subscribers in streaming services, what's working, what's not working. And so it turns out that there are patterns you can learn, especially now when you apply the latest analytical tools.
And at what point do you apply those? So, I mean, is this when you have a movie or a show shot and sort of it gets tested, or can it be earlier than that?
Much earlier, literally at the concept stage. We actually call it, the system is called concept testing system.
So at concept, even before script is written?
That's right. You go to a website, it's called concept testing. And so concept testing says, do you have an idea? We can test that idea. And so the way the system works, it creates, what we call a genome of it, which is basically extracts all the parameters of the concept to the extent that you have them, of the idea.
So it's purely scientific approach, really. I mean, if you're using a genome,
we're nerds. So yes, we take the concepts off. What I like is the fact that we look at real world stuff and we apply empirical approaches. And my hypothesis early on was that the success of content was not too dissimilar to the success of human beings, or biological organisms.
So we're evolving in the same way. Is that what you're saying?
We're not evolving, but when you're born, two things determine your success. One, your genes,
right,
which is your genome.
Yep.
And two, your environment,
right,
which is your exposome.
Yep.
From a genetic point of view. And so they've taken, for example, two identical twins that are genetically identical. That these are long. I mean, this is well published now, but long running longitudinal studies of two identical twins growing in different parts of the world, different regions of the world. They're genetically identical, but they grow up to have a different IQ, different sense of humor, different personality. Now, you and I, of course, talking about like that. Of course, they grew up in different families, different environments, different upbringing, different societies, etc. And so, but the concept is okay. So that means both the internal parameters of an entity in today's world is vital to success. So, the concept, is it based on an IP? Who are the actors? Who are the cast? Who's the director? The producer? What's the mood, the theme, the setting, etc., etc. But also the environment around it. How do you market it? Where do you launch it? How do you window it? What streaming service does it air?
Right.
Do you go on a streaming service? Should you take it to box office if it's a movie? Well, it depends. Let's forecast the box office performance for it. And if we think, no, this is really a streaming movie and it will do better, it will generate more revenue on a streaming service, then taking the wrong decision, even if creatively executed or not really well, but taking the wrong business decision, it could mean success or failure. And now, again, producers have known this for a while, especially in Hollywood. Like they know that the marketing is not done well, and sometimes the creatives blame it on the marketers and so on. But now we can quantify it. Now we can actually route the title to its ideal success pathway.
Yeah, and sorry, excuse me for asking, but how again, how accurate, how effective is this? I mean, do we have case studies of projects that you've been involved in, from concept testing all the way through to?
Yeah, we've been behind some of the biggest, recent launches of movies, of TV shows, franchises. One of my favorites, well, amongst my favorites, really, taking, which again is a long-running phenomenon, but more recently, as you know, there's been higher scrutiny on investments in media entertainment, just from a macroeconomic standpoint. But taking two video game franchises, for example, and let's just say they're of similar level of global popularity, and they both get adapted to a TV show. But one of them is a massive global success, and one of them isn't. So we've been fortunate enough to be involved in a lot of the global successes, but also learning from that. Every time we do one, we learn from it. We learn about and again, people talk about it, but more intuitively, like, oh, you have to be authentic, stay loyal to the video game, the storylines, and so on. But it turns out you can actually quantify it. So it's fun.
Well, I mean, that's really encouraging and exciting to hear. Has it been applied to the region? Again, I'm bringing it back to sort of Arabic content, which is really what we're sort of focused on. We're coming at it from a sort of a business market perspective, that we have recognized that there's an opportunity for Arabic content in the world right now. There's an appetite for it. I mean, your data has confirmed that by the sounds of things.
There's an appetite, and there is headroom for growth.
Right.
There's headroom for growth, which is something we haven't talked about. But that perhaps is from an investment standpoint, not just from a producer standpoint, is one of the most exciting things that you should look forward to, is there headroom for growth. First, to answer your question, has it been applied increasingly more and more? Less so than in other industries, and to be honest, simply because there has been less investment in content, premium content in the region compared to other regions. But increasingly more and more. I'm here talking to you about this because we are seeing a rapid rise. And I know you talk about this, with your audiences on the podcast, but we are seeing increasingly and exponentially increasing investment that matches the exponential increase in demand for Arabic content, because we talked about it's been doubling year on year. So the curve looks quite exponential. It goes from one. But
the investment hasn't been doubling, unfortunately.
Well, it's playing catch up.
Right.
It's playing catch up, and I know a lot of people are looking to change that. And my pitch to investors, or I guess your pitch to investors as a producer of content, should be that not only is the demand increasing, doubling year on year, and is growing exponentially, but check this out. Arabic content, when you look at the total demand for content, you may already know this. I was going to ask you a question, though. I was going to ask you to venture a guess of what percentage do you think the demand for Arabic content constitutes?
Yeah, no, I've seen this actually, because I think it was one of your keynote presentations. So I know the answer to that. So it would be unfair of me. I could claim it and look really smart.
Okay, but let's explain to the audiences. Let's explain to the audiences. It was about 8 billion people in the world or so. Global audiences, about 500 million Arabic speakers.
There's 500 million Arabic speakers, thereabouts.
So thereabouts, it's about 6% or so, give or take, roughly, of the global population that is speaking Arabic. So you would expect, if all industries and all regions invested in content at a similar pattern, and which we know that they don't, and all content traveled equally, then you would expect 6% of global demand to be for Arabic content. It's actually 1/10 of that.
So less than 1%.
It's 0.6%. Wow. That's about 0.5%.
So your point is there's so much room for growth there.
Headroom for growth.
Just to get level.
Headroom for growth. That means there's a supply-demand mismatch.
Right.
Because you have the audiences. But you're not satiating their appetite for content, because you don't have the premium content output, so it's going elsewhere.
Right.
And so now again, that's just looking at the Arabic-speaking audiences.
Yes.
But we were talking about La Casa de Papel being the #1 show globally, or Parasite being #1 movie globally. You have the global world to export to as well.
And in terms of again, bringing it back to the MENA region, in terms of genre and animation versus live action, I mean, do we have any sort of idea on the split of that sort of demand and where most of the demand is for the Arabic content?
At the same keynote that you're referencing, we looked at also how it's one region but many tastes.
Right.
And we highlighted Saudi Arabia as an example, then one of the biggest markets for content. And interestingly, we look at the demographic of the country. about over 60%, 63% of the country is younger than 30 years
Right.
old. All right, so that's from a demographic standpoint, which has its own implications of
Yeah.
how do we think about marketing to them and so on, and producing for them. During Ramadan, which is a historically, very,
Yep.
that's where the local industry sort of peaks, and it's 90% of all Arabic content is produced
That's right.
during Ramadan.
Yeah.
In Saudi, this last Ramadan, 2025, over 25% of the local demand for content was for anime content
In the Ramadan.
during Ramadan.
Oh.
Which is, when you index that relative to other countries
Yep.
in the MENA region,
Yep.
is just astounding when you look
Yes.
at the charts.
Yes.
And so you actually have a number of different tastes on a country by country basis. And that's kind of what I love the most about what we do is sometimes people come to us with these preconceived notions or ideas about, oh, that's a region, the Middle East or Latin America. Well, no, Latin America has quite a diverse diaspora.
Yeah.
When you look at trends in Brazil versus Chile and Peru and
Yeah.
Mexico, Argentina, you get quite different, tastes, very similar to the Middle East. And so when you look at, Egypt during Ramadan, over 60% Arabic dramas.
Right.
Not even any other genres. Like just
30 episode formats.
that's like, it's Arabic dramas, primarily Egyptian Arabic dramas also, not just
Yes.
other in Arabic dramas.
Yeah.
And so they're very local Egyptian content. Now, obviously, Egypt is a more mature content production market relative to the other countries.
Yeah.
But understanding that, not just from producer standpoint, obviously we work with many regional streamers also, is helping them program accordingly. So figuring out, how do I program during this month? What content do I license? What content do I acquire? Not just what do I invest in, but what third-party content do I acquire?
Yeah. And what I'm really interested in as well is, as you'd mentioned earlier, it's not film entertainment is a very wide sort of umbrella, but bringing together the right talent for the right project, match with the right brand. And that sort of, I've used the term magic sort of trifecta of bringing those together, because from a producer standpoint, again, revenue-wise, financially, if you can demonstrate, bringing those together properly, that's a huge win.
Honestly, about 80% of my time now is going into these types of conversations.
Really?
Which
Okay.
is.
I thought it was just me.
No, it's fun because, man, we have been talking about this for so many years.
Right.
And I think with the recent shift in the global shift in the view of AI and technology and analytics has really changed perception.
Yeah.
But we've been talking about this for years. And I remember one of the very first keynotes, public keynotes that I was in LA, and I think it was some variety hosted, entertainment analytics summit. And, I presented this view of the consumer, just the average consumer.
Right.
And I put all the different touch points around that average consumer that we measure. So when I say we measure about 2-3 billion people on a given day, and the average consumer watches a TV show, watches a movie. They follow a certain sport, one or more sports. They have their favorite sports team, favorite athletes. They have their favorite talent, favorite actor. They have their favorite brand of cars and headphones and shampoo and shoes and sneakers, and and they follow their favorite band, artists, music. They subscribe to these services and so on and so forth. All these different things, again, the attention economy.
Yeah.
All these different things are capturing that consumer's attention.
Right.
Now, it sounds in like a 2D map, but it's actually a 3-dimensional affinity chart. Meaning, take consumer 1, Bob, and Bob. All of these different entities are capturing Bob's attention.
Yep.
So you look at that and you go, well, so then is there a relationship between the TV shows that Bob watches and their favorite band music? Take any of these two entities and go, is there a relationship between? Well, there has to be.
Right. The overlap, basically.
The overlap. The relationship is between that band. If I just look at it from a 2-dimensional standpoint, or not to get too technical in the analytics technique, but if I just look at it from a 2-dimensional standpoint, the relationship between this TV show and that musician or that musical band, the relation between them is Bob.
Right.
Bob watches the show and Bob listens to this music.
Right.
Okay. But what if there was 3 million other Bobs that also watch that TV show and whose favorite artist or musician is this band?
Yes.
Well, suddenly there's quite a strong affinity between this show and this band.
Right.
Right. And so when you cluster, when the affinity network from a three-dimensional point of view, you start to get these thick bands between entities, between TV shows
Yep.
and musicians, between sports leagues and brands and brands of cars,
Yep.
between etc. Right. And so what does that mean you're a producer?
Yep.
What music do you bring?
That's right. What brand placement, what product placement, etc.
What placement do you get?
Yep.
You know, what drink is that person having on that show or this movie and that scene? And that's to quantify that globally and also at a country-specific basis. It's fun, man. It's fun because there are hundreds of projects that we're across now where you see these affinity networks and you inform these decisions and you see the results afterwards that come out, and it's fun, it's fascinating. And also we need it to de-risk investments. Don't forget, this is historically a very risky industry.
Yes.
9 out of every 10 new TV shows don't make it past season 1.
That's based on
globally.
That's based on a historical approach.
Up to date.
Yeah.
Up to the end of 2023, actually, when we sort of looked at it and we were like, wow, we need to do something about this. 9 out of every 10 TV shows don't make it past season 1.
So 90% failure.
90% failure rate. Oh. Right? That's just, by the way, like making it past season 1 isn't even a global hit. That's a relatively modest measure of success. It's just renewal past season 1. Right? And in terms of like what percentage of shows that actually become global standout hits, people know. It's it's very, very, very minuscule. And so what we started doing is back testing our concept testing system that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Let's go back to 2016, 2015, 2017, 18, 19, and let's analyze all the concept projects. And just based on the data that was available at the time, and let's remove all the data. And I'm circling back to your question about accuracy.
Yes.
Also, because it's vital that we approach this from a scientific point of view. We have a 6 to 7x higher hit rate when we let the data decide, when we let audiences. So we talk about these relationships and affinities. When you apply that at scale and you go, hey, I have this concept, is this going to be successful with the following actors attached to it? Is this going to be a global hit?
So hold on, this is a big statement. So me as a producer, I have a slate of 10 projects, right? Historically, my hit rate is going to be 1, maybe 2 of those is going to be a hit.
If you get 2 out of 10, then you're doubling. Yeah, you're pretty good.
But applying advanced analytics to this,
make it 6 to 7 times higher.
Wow.
You get 6 to 7 out of 10, which fundamentally changes the business model, because historically
you're turning it on its head, basically.
You're turning basically what is historically a VC style model, investment model, like venture capital model, where you make 10 bets and 9 of them fail, but the one that succeeds makes your money back, some, hopefully.
Right.
So what we're doing really is inverting on its head, applying a scientific approach. The media entertainment industry is one of the top 10 largest industries from a capital transaction point of view. So from just a monetary value point of view, but it has one of the worst ROI rates in terms of new capital investment relative to returns compared to other industries. We're turning on its head. So it is going to be a very, very exciting phase.
No, I'm really encouraged by this. And I think this also gives us an opportunity in this region to put us on more of a level playing field. We're not playing catch up anymore, because we've always looked at Hollywood obviously as being the sort of the beacon of the industry, and they're the trends that you follow. But by the sounds of things, we have an opportunity to have a more level playing field now. We can compete on the global stage. There's an appetite for our Arabic content.
And headroom for growth.
And what you just described as well allows us to make more informed decisions, to sort of have a better hit rate. And this has always been my argument, is that we can never really advance unless we start attracting more private investment into this industry. You had alluded to this at the beginning of the conversation. The reason we haven't been successful, there hasn't been enough investment in this. And we can't just keep relying on government investment and subsidies and film commissions and incentives and so on. There has to be private investment. But in order for us to get to that stage, we need to be able to demonstrate that there's a return on investment. So if I'm a real estate investor and somebody can make the argument to me that actually, you can make some decent return on investment if you get involved in content, then that's a huge win, and that's where we're trying to get to.
As added bonus, you get to go to Cannes and hang out with superstars and got the
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you're into that sort of thing, absolutely.
As an added,
absolutely.
A large chunk of real estate investors would be probably, but
But that's a really good point. So we're talking about Cannes and sort of all these international festivals and so on. What about us? I mean, I think the Red Sea have done a great job in sort of creating a global festival. I think we definitely need more of that.
I think you need more of that. I think the region needs. I think you can't do enough. Honestly, when I just look from a data point of view, right? Like there's a whole bunch of other things I'm not going to get into, but just from an audience appetite point of view, you cannot do enough to satiate the demand for it.
Well, it's been a fascinating conversation, hugely encouraging, specifically for Arabic producers. And I think, if we didn't have enough sort of information and encouragement to really push ahead with what we're doing, you've helped sort of give us a little bit more motivation.
I'm glad, yeah.
Thank you for being here. It's been
a
wonderful conversation. Thank you
so much.
Thank you for joining us for this fascinating conversation. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of The Real Deal.